What if the next great All Blacks enforcer was hiding in plain sight, but the system never saw him clearly? Vaea Fifita wasn't just talented, he was terrifying. Born in Tonga, his journey to international rugby didn't begin in a training academy or development squad. It started with a scholarship, a shot, a chance. When he moved to New Zealand to attend Tamaki College, coaches and players immediately saw something different. A towering frame, 1.96 meters tall, over 110 kilograms of raw explosive muscle. But it wasn't just his size, it was his speed. The kind of speed that made you question physics. He wasn't just competing with the backs, he was one. Despite his lock-sized body, they put him on the wing. He wasn't awkward, he was dominant. At the schoolboy level, it was a mismatch every time. He wasn't growing into the game, he was bending it around himself. He didn't just have potential, he had the kind of athletic gifts you can't teach and rarely even see. And if you're into stories like this, where talent meets systems and dreams either rise or collapse, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We dive deep into the forgotten, the mismanaged, and the misunderstood. You won't want to miss what's coming next. After graduation, Fifita didn't take a shortcut to fame. He worked his way up through the Wellington system, clawing through the ranks with performances that couldn't be ignored. His debut with the Hurricanes in Super Rugby made one thing clear. This wasn't just another physical player. This was an athlete with an edge, a disruptor, a nightmare for defenders. Fans loved him because he didn't just run into contact, he exploded through it like a human sledgehammer. Commentators started calling him a highlight reel in motion. One minute he'd be smashing a ruck, the next gliding down the touchline like a winger. It didn't make sense. It didn't have to. It just worked. But what really set him apart was his unpredictability. New Zealand rugby has always prized precision, structure, and composure. But Fifita brought chaos in the best way. Chaos that forced defenders to panic, to guess, to fail. This wasn't a guy playing by the book. He was rewriting it. 2017 was the year everything changed. Vaea Fifita was called up to the All Blacks, a dream only a handful of players ever realize. His debut against Samoa was solid, but it was what happened during the Rugby Championship that year that shook the rugby world. Against Argentina, with the match on a knife's edge, Fifita picked up the ball just outside the 40-meter line, and then he detonated. He tore through defenders like they weren't even there. It was a try that didn't just go viral, it got burned into the memories of fans around the world. How could someone that big move like that? Commentators compared it to something a winger would do, not a blindside flanker, not a number 6. Suddenly, the rugby world had a new obsession. Vaea Fifita, the second coming of Jerome Kaino. At that point, it felt like the script was writing itself. A young, powerful, dynamic flanker ready to step into the void, left by a retiring legend. The All Blacks had found their next enforcer, or so we thought. But just when everything was aligning, the cracks started to show. Not in Fifita's game, but in how the All Blacks used him. Instead of cementing him into the number 6 jersey, the same one Jerome Kaino had owned with authority, the coaching staff began experimenting. One week, he was a blindside flanker. The next, a lock. Then he came off the bench with no clear role. Sometimes he'd start, sometimes he wouldn't even make the squad. It felt less like strategy and more like confusion. The very trait that made him stand out, his versatility, was now being used against him. Instead of building a system around his unique skill set, the coaches were tossing him around like a utility player. And you don't treat a once-in-a-generation athlete like a plug-and-play option. He wasn't given time to grow into a role, to make mistakes and improve. He was expected to be perfect immediately. And if he wasn't, he'd be sidelined, replaced, forgotten. Compare that to Kaino. Jerome had years of consistent selection. He was backed, trusted, and developed. Fifita, he never got that. No long-term plan, no defined purpose, just shifting roles and shifting expectations. And slowly, the momentum faded, not because of a lack of talent, but because the system didn't know what to do with him. And that was the beginning of the end. By 2019, Fifita was still performing week in, week out for the Hurricanes in Wellington, yet his name stopped appearing in All Blacks conversations. There was no injury, no form slump, just silence. In interviews, his frustration surfaced. He wasn't being told why. No feedback, no guidance. Just the quiet message every athlete fears. You're not part of the plan. And in a system built on communication, this silence spoke volumes. In 2021, Fifita made the call. He signed with Wasps in England. He wasn't washed up. He wasn't limping to the end. He was still in his prime. But when a player is given no clarity, no direction, and no belief, eventually they stop waiting. And with New Zealand's strict policy against picking overseas players, that contract wasn't just a move. It was a farewell. A farewell he didn't want, but had to make. In England, something changed. At Wasps, he was given something he hadn't had in years, a real role. He wasn't shuffled. He wasn't benched. He was trusted. His game lit up again. Line breaks, tackles, dominance. Then, when Wasps collapsed, he moved to Scarlets in Wales and picked up right where he left off. Turns out Fifita didn't need fixing. He just needed a coach who believed in him. In 2023, everything came full circle. Vaea Fifita walked onto the field wearing red, not the iconic black of New Zealand, but the deep crimson of Tonga, the country of his birth. Thanks to New World Rugby eligibility laws, players who hadn't represented Tier 1 nations in 3 years could return to play for their country of origin. For Fifita, that meant something more than just a second chance. It meant belonging, and from the first whistle, it was obvious. He still had it. The power, the acceleration, the game-changing presence. In a World Cup filled with giants, Vaea stood tall, not just physically, but symbolically. He wasn't a relic of past potential. He was a weapon still fully loaded, fully capable, and finally respected. For New Zealand fans watching, it was bittersweet. Seeing a man who once tore through Argentina in black now doing the same in red against them. He hadn't lost a step, he just lost a system. And the worst part? Tonga embraced what New Zealand cast aside. When Jerome Kaino left the All Blacks, everyone knew the void would be hard to fill, but few expected it to remain unfilled for so long. New Zealand tried. They rotated names. Liam Squire, Shannon Frizzell, Akira Iwan. Each had moments. Each had flaws. None stuck. The blindside flanker role, once the beating heart of All Blacks physicality, became a revolving door, and that's where the regret begins. Fifita wasn't just another option. He was a prototype for the modern loose forward. He had the frame of a lock, the mobility of a winger, and the tackle-breaking instincts of a center. And yet, while others were molded and protected, he was rotated, benched, and left adrift. He didn't lack skill, he lacked commitment. From those above him, had they stuck with him, given him the same patience afforded to others, New Zealand might have had their next great enforcer, a man to carry on the Kaino legacy, a player to define an era. Instead, they hesitated, they second-guessed, and in doing so, they lost him. The legacy he could have built became someone else's to enjoy. There was no fall from grace, no explosive scandal, no injury that derailed his career. What happened to Vaea Fifita wasn't loud. It was slow, quiet, and entirely avoidable. It was the kind of failure that's harder to talk about because it's not dramatic. It's administrative, systemic, a byproduct of indecision, poor planning, and a lack of vision. Fifita didn't leave New Zealand rugby because he couldn't compete. He left because he was mismanaged, because he was offered no role, no consistency, no pathway forward. In England and Wales, he rediscovered his passion. In Tonga, he rediscovered his purpose. And now, as he dominates in Europe and represents his homeland with pride, the All Blacks are left with a haunting question. What if we had simply believed in him? What if instead of treating him like a utility option, they treated him like a cornerstone? What if New Zealand rugby hadn't looked past the wrecking ball they had? For players still trying to become one, Fifita never needed to change. He needed to be trusted, and as he thrives in the twilight of his career, it's not just his redemption arc, it's New Zealand's cautionary tale. Because in the end, it wasn't Vaea who walked away, it was New Zealand rugby that let go.